Hebrews 5 verses 1 to 3. The human priest and the perfect Christ. For every high priest chosen from among mortals is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness. And because of this, he must offer sacrifice for his own sins as well as for those of the people. In the long corridors of Israel's worship, the figure of the high priest stood as both bridge and barrier. He was the bridge between sinful men and a holy God, yet the barrier reminding them that sin still lingered, separating heaven and earth. Clad in linen and bearing the names of the tribes upon his breastplate, he moved through the rituals of atonement, anointed, trembling, and conscious that every drop of blood he sprinkled was as much for himself as for the people. His ministry was noble, yet never final, his work sacred, yet never sufficient. The preacher of Hebrews pauses here to remind us that before we can behold the radiant perfection of Christ's priesthood, we must understand what true priesthood requires: humanity that represents, compassion that understands, and weakness that reveals the need for something greater. Hebrews 5 verses 1 to 3 reveals that every true high priest must share humanity's nature, embody compassionate sympathy through shared weakness, and offer sacrifices for sin, thereby exposing the imperfection of the old order and preparing us to behold the flawless priesthood of Christ. First, humanity that represents. The opening line strikes the foundation: every high priest taken from among men. The phrase underscores origin and solidarity. He is not an angelic envoy, nor a distant symbol of holiness, but a man among men, bone of their bone, flesh of their flesh. Thayer notes that the Greek ex anthropon lambanomenos carries the sense of one selected out of the midst, chosen precisely because he shares the same frail substance as those he represents. As Calvin observes, God designed the priesthood not to elevate man above his fellows, but to set one of them apart for their sake, a representative who might stand in their stead before God. The priest is thus a mirror of humanity's need, bearing in his person both their weakness and their worth. Haldane and Hodge remind us that this representative office, in things pertaining to God, points directly to mediation and sacrifice. It is not advisory, but sacrificial, not administrative, but redemptive. His charge is not to speak about sin, but to stand between sin and wrath. The priest's calling, therefore, was profoundly human. Every offering of incense, every bleeding sacrifice, every crimson stain upon the altar whispered the same truth. Humanity cannot save itself, but it must be represented. Here we find the seedbed of the gospel, God's plan to redeem man through a man, to heal through one who shares the wound. Second, compassion that understands. Verse 2 adds the moral requirement. He is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness. The word translated deal gently is metriopatein, a term rare and rich. Thayer renders it as to feel moderately, while Kittle expands it to mean a sympathy that neither indulges nor condemns, a balanced compassion born of shared frailty. The priest's sympathy is not sentimental but sanctified. His understanding of sin's snare is not theoretical but experiential. As Hendrickson observes, the high priest's own struggles make him gentle, not indulgent, toward those who stumble. He knows the ache of temptation, the frailty of the flesh, and therefore approaches the erring not with contempt but compassion. In this we see the wisdom of divine ordination. God allows the mediator's own weakness to teach mercy. The priest must remember what it feels like to wander, lest his ministry become mechanical. Yet even this tenderness exposes limitation. For though he may pity, he cannot purify. Though he may sympathize, he cannot save. His own heart needs atonement before his hands may minister grace. Third, weakness that exposes the imperfect order. Here the argument turns inward. Because of this, he must offer sacrifice for his own sins as well as for those of the people. The phrase dia tata, for this reason, links sympathy to insufficiency. The priest's weakness does not merely make him gentle, it makes him guilty. Hughes remarks that this necessity of self-offering revealed the built-in deficiency of the entire Levitical system. Every high priest entered the Holy of Holies as both mediator and offender. Before he could speak for others, he must atone for himself. Barnes vividly notes that the smoke of his own sacrifice rose beside that of the nation, a double testimony to sin's pervasive reach. Thus, what was intended to mediate grace simultaneously magnified the need for a greater priest. The very garments of glory were stitched with threads of imperfection. As Robertson and Schreiner observe, the repetition of these sacrifices taught Israel to look beyond Aaron's line to a sinless mediator, one who would stand where none else could stand, whose compassion would be perfect because his righteousness was pure. Reflections for today. The echo of this passage still rings in every heart that tries to draw near to God on its own merit. Like Israel's priests, we sense our distance and long for mediation. Yet too often we build altars of self-effort, trusting in good works, moral resolve, or religious ritual to bridge the gap. But these can never suffice. Every attempt to atone for oneself is another shadow cast upon the true altar where Christ has already bled. In our age of self-assertion, this passage confronts the pride that forgets dependence. The priest was taken from among men, not self-appointed but called. His office reminds us that spiritual authority is never seized, it is bestowed. How different the church would be if every leader, every pastor, remembered that the right to serve flows not from ambition but from grace. Then there is compassion. The high priest's gentleness toward the ignorant and wayward exposes our own hardness toward those who falter. We live in an impatient generation quick to condemn weakness in others while hiding our own. But the true servant of Christ ministers best when he ministers as one forgiven. The heart that knows its own infirmity becomes a cradle for mercy. Finally, the imperfection of the old priesthood drives us to worship the perfect priest. In Christ there is no need for another offering, no smoke rising for his own sin, no tremor of guilt before the mercy seat. His humanity was without corruption, his compassion without compromise. The very weakness that disqualified the sons of Aaron became, in Christ, the means of divine strength. For he took our weakness, yet without sin, that we might stand before God without fear. Conclusion. Hebrews 5 verses 1-3 lays the groundwork for the great unveiling of Christ's priesthood. It shows us the human need that demanded representation, the frailty that required compassion, and the imperfection that anticipated a sinless Redeemer. The old priesthood, noble but flawed, was but a shadow cast toward Calvary, where the true high priest would offer himself, not for his sins but for ours, and open forever the way to God. In him, humanity and holiness meet without fracture, compassion and perfection kiss. And in his pierced hands, the ancient longing for a perfect mediator finds its eternal rest.